Today we're going to be looking at the founding and development of both the Plymouth colony as well as the Massachusetts Bay colony. Here you can quickly do a quick review of looking at this image. You can describe what you see in this image. Does this image portray a positive or negative interaction between the two groups of people you see? Do you think this image is historically accurate? And explain your answer. And after we go over this slide, so you can come up to your own conclusions on your answers. We'll start off with the progress of the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were a group of separatists. Separatists are English Christians in the 1500s and 1600s who break away from the Church of England. At this time, the most powerful person in this world was the Pope, and he was the head of the Catholic Church. And the King of England was not too thrilled with that, so what they decided to do was break away from the Catholic Church, and they created their own church, the Church of England. However, the Pilgrims weren't necessarily thrilled with that because they didn't share all the same beliefs and practices as the members of the Church of England. The Pilgrims faced some problems with that because it is actually required by law to be a member of the Church of England for any English citizens. So the fact that the separatists were outspoken or the Pilgrims were outspoken on their religious beliefs caused them to be persecuted for their religious beliefs. So eventually, the Pilgrims are looking for a way out of England so they can go and practice their religion freely. So eventually, they get permission from the Virginia Company, who we learned last class established the colony of Jamestown. And they got permission to settle in a settlement right next to Jamestown. So in 1620, they board a ship called the Mayflower, and they sail across the Atlantic Ocean. On the Mayflower, though, they were not alone. They were with another group of people that they called the Strangers. The Strangers were also on that ship, but their reasoning to go to the New World was quite different. They were looking to become wealthy. They were looking to find natural resources so they can trade in and strike the rich, where the Pilgrims were there to be able to practice their religion freely. So it's quite a contrast in reasonings why they went to the New World. So they all arrived in North America in 1620 and named the colony Plymouth after a town in England. So call forward. So the Mayflower did not make it to their original destination, which was in the Jamestown area. While they were on the Mayflower going across the Atlantic Ocean, they hit some rough patches and encountered some storms, and that took them off their course. And they settled in Massachusetts near Cape Cod. While on the ship, while they were being, in view of the land, they were the Pilgrims were a little skeptical of the strangers. They felt that the strangers were being a little sneaky. They thought they were maybe planning on rebelling or planning a mutiny and overthrowing the Pilgrims. The strangers believed that since they were not in the Virginia Company territory, that they didn't have to kind of follow any of the rules and they could do as they want. As things kind of calmed down a bit, the strangers and the Pilgrims sat down and they decided, hey, before we get on this land, let's create a plan or a set of rules that we all must abide by in order for us to be successful here. Because if we go onto this land without this set of rules and order, there will be complete chaos. So they decided to come up with an agreement called the Mayflower Compact. The document calls for colonists to meet regularly to discuss issues, to elect key leaders, to vote on laws that are just and fair for all. The reason that this document is so important in history, in American history, is because it sets up the first system of self-government. Right? All these settlers originally were, abided by King's law. All of a sudden, they are governing the land themselves and are creating the laws by themselves. And it's also the first written plan for democratic government in North America. So now it's ruled by the people, no longer ruled by the king. And here's just an image of the signing of the Mayflower Compact. You can notice the Pilgrims and the strangers dress very differently. The strangers typically wearing brighter colors. The Pilgrims wearing more darker colors, wearing black, wearing the basic, black hat, because they're typically more, I guess, humble in their attire. So the bad times and good times. So when the colonists arrived at Plymouth, unfortunately for them, they arrived in December. I don't know how familiar many of you are with Massachusetts or with New England in general, but in the winter months, it could be quite brutal. It could be quite cold. Sometimes getting below zero. Um, and as we learned in Jamestown, when the settlers arrived, they immediately had to start building a settlement so they can have a place to sleep and create some kind of order. But that's not so easy to do when it's incredibly cold. So the first winter is pretty insufferable. Half of the colonists died due to poor shelter. Obviously the Cold War, a lot of sickness, and lack of food creates about half of the colonists dying. So we're already learning the first two colonies that we're learning about Jamestown. The first settlers, about 2/3 died. Plymouth, the first settlers, about half of them died. So we're learning that this is not an easy go. And these people obviously are very have some strong convictions if they're willing to risk it all to escape what they were escaping, that religious persecution back in England. So the next person that we're going to learn about is Squanto. So Squanto is introduced to the colonists of Plymouth in the spring following 1620, or in the spring of 1621. Um, and the colonists were pleasantly surprised because he actually spoke English, which was uncommon for many natives that lived in the land. There were many neighboring tribes. No, probably none of them spoke English. So the fact that Squanto was able to speak English, because he was actually captured by English settlers years earlier. And he actually was a huge help to the Plymouth colony. He actually introduced colonists to the Walden Indian chief. And Walden was just a new tribe. And he introduced them to another Indian chief, Massasoit, helping them establish some kind of, peace and some kind of trade relations in order to help the Plymouth colony be more successful. He also served as an interpreter to help set up trade with the colonists and other neighboring Native Americans. He also, this is probably the most important, he actually helped teach them how to raise a lot of crops that were going to be are sustainable in this colony for this type of soil. Remember, New England has a shorter growing season because it is a different climate than the South. It's a much colder climate, so their time to grow crops is much shorter than most of the other ones. So giving thanks. So Squanto's contributions to the settlers helped them have their first good harvest, and this called for celebration. That the Puritans, the Pilgrims, giving thanks to God because they are, remember, incredibly religious. Obviously, giving thanks to Squanto for helping them get this good harvest. So they invited the neighboring tribe, the Wampanoag Native Americans, over. Many of them. And they have a 3-day festival where they're eating, they're celebrating all their successes. Traditionally we think of Thanksgiving as turkey. Most likely they're probably eating duck, goose, venison. Those were the animals that were more likely to be a rodent at that time, not necessarily turkey. The Plymouth colony eventually develops into a stable settlement during the 1620s. More colonists start arriving. They start having more good harvests that help kind of keep the colony alive. Eventually set up more trading houses with local Native Americans. By 1627, about 160 colonists are living there. But as time progresses, more and more colonists grow. The strain will be there. Right? Native Americans will start getting pushed out of the land, and that's pretty much the story of American history. As the colonies grow, as eventually when the colonies become the United States, as the United States grows, the Native Americans are typically going to draw the short end of the stick, and unfortunately, the kind of it's a form of genocide where Native Americans have been slowly wiped out in this country. And that's one of the stains of American history. The next colony we're going to look at is the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So this is where things might get a little bit confusing, right? Because we were introduced to the Pilgrims. Now, even you heard me before, I slipped up and I said Puritans when I meant Pilgrims. But the Puritans and the Pilgrims, both their biggest similarities, they both came here to escape religious persecution. One of their differences, how they wanted to handle the Church of England. Remember, the Pilgrims were known as separatists, meaning they wanted to separate from the Church of England. They wanted to break away. They no longer wanted to be a part of the Church of England. While the Puritans wanted to remain a part of the Church of England. They just wanted to reform it. They wanted to change it. They wanted to get rid of those Catholic elements. They wanted to purify it, hence the name Puritans. But since they're so outspoken about their beliefs, remember, it is required by law to be a member of the Church of England. And since the Puritans are speaking out about what they're not pleased about in regards to the Church of England, guess what? That's going to lead them to being persecuted and mistreated for their religious beliefs. So what they did in 1608, they fled to Holland with another neighboring European country. By 1620, they decided to move to the New World. They hear about some of the successes, and they realize, heck, if we move over there, we could just practice our religion freely and be who we are without, fear of punishment. So they moved to Plymouth in 1620, and now they're living amongst the Pilgrims. At first, things are pretty, going smoothly. All of a sudden, there's a little tension because there are some, philosophical differences. So the Puritans appeal to King Charles now, and they're asking for a charter. They get this charter in 1629, and they are awarded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they break away from the Plymouth Colony. They appoint John Winthrop, who you see in the image on the right, dressed very similar to the Pilgrims, and that's why there's always these misconceptions where the Pilgrims and Puritans are the same. They are actually, they're different because remember, Pilgrims separatist, Puritans want to purify the Church of England. The Puritan way. So the Puritans did come to Massachusetts Bay to worship their religion freely. They wanted to just be able to practice their religion without being punished for it. Winthrop, as you can see here in this image, calls Massachusetts Bay the city upon a hill to remind colonists to kind of live by these high ideals that are set by their religion, to live up to the word of God. And the way that Massachusetts was governed was through a theocracy. A theocracy is a government run by religious leaders and religious laws. Um, so pretty much it was run by the Puritan ideology. So it's different than how we live in this country, right? Because we have a variety of religions. So we don't govern by our religious beliefs. We govern by a set of laws, a set of ideals that are not grounded in the Bible. Where Puritans, all their rules, all their laws were grounded in the Word of God. Um, in Massachusetts, the meeting house is the heart of the Puritan town. I have images on the right hand side that you can see of modern day meeting houses, or the meeting houses from that time that are still in existence today in Boston. You can see the outside is all brick, on the inside it's gorgeous carpentry, and this is where they met. But these meeting houses had multiple purposes. It served not only as just a meeting house, it served as a community house, a church, a courthouse, places that they conducted business, government building. So it was like a multi-purpose building. It was located in the center of town, so everyone could get to it in relatively a short amount of time. This is where the Puritan men, specifying men, were able to kind of exercise a form of democracy where they get to vote on their own laws of the town. Remember, it is only the men at the time who are going to be able to govern um, the land or govern the colony. Um, so, really quick, there is a video that is posted on Schoology that I strongly suggest you watch. It's titled "Video Pilgrims vs. Puritans." It kind of clarifies the differences between both groups of people that did settle in the New England colonies. Remember, Pilgrims are separatists. They settled the Plymouth colony. Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England, and they settled the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Um, please make sure you are going and doing those assignments on Schoology for this week. If you have any difficulty, please call me, text me, email me, whatever you need. I'm here for you. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and peace out.